wonderful people of the internet. Today I have some book recommendations for you. So let's get started.
Okay, so it is officially spooky season now, and I thought what better way to start October than with a book recommendation video. So I'm going to be basing all of my book recommendations in this video around sort of spooky books that are going to creep you out, or hopefully, if that's what you're looking for, keep you up at night. Okay, so book number one is one of my personal favourites actually, Coraline by Neil Gaiman. So this tells the story of a young girl by the name of Coraline who moves into a new house with her parents, and there's this door on the wall. And she's really curious about what this door is, so she opens it, and it's all bricked up on the inside. The door goes nowhere. And then one night while she's asleep, she opens the door, and lo and behold, there is a tunnel. She goes through the tunnel, comes through into the kitchen of her house again, and finds her mum. But she isn't her mum, because she has buttons instead of eyes. And this book is just wonderfully creepy. It's really atmospheric and feels quite hopeless at some points. It's not a book to keep you up at night per se, but it would definitely creep you out. I think this, for a book at this length, it achieves a lot on the terms of story and atmosphere. And even better, there's a great adaptation of this made by Leica, which is sort of a stop-motion studio, and this is their first film, Coraline. And I feel like the stop-motion in the film really helps get the atmosphere from the book, because the weird look, sort of inhuman look of the characters and the sort of things they can do with them makes the story feel a lot creepier as well. So I would really, really recommend this book. It's quite short, so that's convenient. And the movie as well. I'm not sure if it's on Netflix, but I'm sure you could buy it on Amazon Prime if you have a subscription on there for a low price. So definitely read this one. "If you want to stay," said her other father, "there's only one little thing we'll have to do, so you can stay here forever and always." They went into the kitchen. On a china plate on the kitchen table were a spool of black cotton and a long silver needle, and, beside them, 2 large black buttons. "I don't think so," said Coraline. "Oh, but we want you to," said her other mother. "We want you to stay. And it's just a little thing. It won't hurt," said her other father. My next recommendation is the Works of Hhp Lovecraft, which I've got up here. Now, obviously, I don't want you to go out and buy or, try and get your hands on a big old tome like this, because Hhp Lovecraft, this is the author, that this is a compendium of all his works, wrote a lot of short stories and a few novellas, and he always wrote horror, a specific brand of horror called cosmic horror, which is essentially about monsters that drive people mad if they look at them, something so incomprehensible to the human mind that it makes you go crazy just looking at them. And sort of concepts like that. He has a lot of interesting stories, and why I haven't read very many of them, he is a great horror writer, and his brand of horror, cosmic horror, is just so different to the sort of things that we usually get. And I'm also going to recommend a comic writer who also does cosmic horror later on in the video, so that's going to be a recurring theme. Now, a few of the short stories recommended on the front are The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, The Call of Cthulhu, which is perhaps one of his most famous work, The Dunwich Horror, At the Mountain of Madness, another really famous one, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Colour Out of Space, and The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadaf. I really recommend you try and get your hands on maybe a PDF copy of some of these. Now, they can be a bit of a hit and miss. Some of them are definitely more startling than the others, so I'd recommend browsing through his catalogue and see what catches your eye. "I have looked upon all the universe has to hold of horror, and even the skies of spring and flowers of summer must ever afterward be poison to me." My next spooky recommendation is Stephen King, and the 2 books that I've read of his, which are The Shining and Misery. Now, Misery is one of the books I'm currently reading, but The Shining, which I have read, is my favourite book of all time. So Stephen King really needs no introduction. He's one of the most famous writers still alive at our time. He's written things like It, The Shining, and Misery, which have all been adapted into some really famous films, so you've probably heard of one of his stories from somewhere. So Stephen King has this unique way of writing that just makes you sucked into the plot and makes you care about the characters of the story instantly. So in The Shining, it's about a family who move to a hotel in the winter that is haunted. In Misery, which I haven't got on me because I've got that down the stairs where I'm reading it, is about an author called Paul Sheldon who, after a car crash, is trapped by a crazy woman who claims to be his #1 fan. Both of these focus very much on isolation. It's a small cast of characters in a really iffy situation, and the sort of horror, the frights, the violence that ensues. He's amazing at writing it, and I do recommend them. Now, The Shining has quite a lot of swearing in, so if you're sensitive to things like that, I wouldn't read this. Although Stephen King does swear quite a lot in general, but this was excessive, and there was some particularly offensive language in here. So if you're susceptible or don't want to read stuff like that, this also contains themes of domestic abuse. So if you don't like any of that, don't read The Shining. Misery, which I'm not too far through yet, but there's only been about one swear word so far, I believe, which is pretty good going. And I feel like, I don't know, there's drug addiction in it, and there are some really, really horrible things that go on in it. There's a lot of violence that I won't get into. It's notorious for this one particular scene that if you search it up, don't if you're younger or faint of heart. There's this particular scene called the hobbling scene involving an axe and the guy's feet, and I'll say no more. So they're both quite violent, both quite dark, but Stephen King's an awesome writer, and I really recommend you read him. Time passed, and he was just beginning to relax, just beginning to realise that the door must be unlocked and he could go, when the year's damp, bloat, fish-smelling hands closed softly around his throat, and he was turned implacably around to stare into that dead and purple face. Okay. So next I have got a writer called Junji Ito, so I'll go and grab his books now. Okay, so Junji Ito is a manga writer, which means that he writes Japanese comics, and he uses the same brand of horror as Hp Lovecraft. So here's an example of one of his books. It's called Uzumaki, and here's another one, Shiver. So this book, Uzumaki, which I read quite recently. This story is about a town. What's the town called? Kurozucho. I don't know if that's right, it's a Japanese name. But it's about a town called Kurozucho, and it is being overtaken by spirals. Now, that doesn't sound particularly scary when I say it like that, but this focuses on cosmic horror and body horror. And when I say body horror, oh boy, it's disgusting. You know, if people say with normal books a movie will not scare, nothing can scare me more than my own imagination. Let me guarantee that Mr. Ito here will put down your worst nightmares on paper, maybe make them even worse. I might put a few more of the mild pictures on a montage in the video, but it's really, really yucky, you know. You'll never look at spirals in the same way. Snails, hair, you're not going to want to go anywhere near it. It's disgusting. Now this one, Shiver, is a collection of some of Junji Ito's best short stories. So there's ones like, just looking at the front, there's the one called Shiver, which is about a boy who starts getting insectine holes in his face, because insects breathe through holes in their body. He starts getting that. There's another one about balloons that look like people that are hunting them and hanging them. It's some really weird stuff, and the artwork just really spices things up. It makes things a whole lot creepier. I'll show you on the side here, if I can get the lighting right. There's a picture of one of these balloons. It's a really, really really creepy set of stories that could give you nightmares, I suppose. So I recommend picking up any of this guy's writing, really, although these are the only ones that I own and have read. So if you're looking for, you know, a comic book, and a scary one at that, go Junji Ito. You can't go wrong with him. Spirals. This town is contaminated with spirals. Okay, so my final recommendation is another manga series. I'll just get now, once I put these back. It is called Death Note by Tsugumi Oba and Takeshi Obata. Now, there are two authors because one of them wrote the story, the other one drew it. And this is not technically a horror book. In fact, it's not a horror book in any way, shape or form, but it is very dark, and I feel like it fits Halloween quite well. It's about this guy on the cover, a really, you know, straight-ace Japanese high school student called Light Yagami. One day he finds a notebook dropped in the schoolyard, and it's called the Death Note. And he opens it up and it says, "Whoever's name is written in this notebook shall die." And he thinks, huh, that's a bit weird. And he takes it home, and he decides he's going to try it out, and he does it on a criminal, and they die. And all of a sudden, Light begins this sort of religious crusade to rid the world of all the evil people, going a bit crazy in the process, but he does not go unchallenged because the greatest detective in the world, called L, is opposing him. Now, the sort of concept, you can kill people with this notebook, and the atmosphere is very dark and serious, and just to sort of sprinkle some spookiness on top, this notebook was dropped by a death god called a Shinigami, and he looks a bit creepy. I'll show him to you right now. That's the lovely little guy. He's not a villain. He just follows Light around, sort of cracking jokes and critiquing what he's doing. But that definitely adds to the spooky atmosphere. I really recommend that because it's not necessarily a horror book, but it's a spooky mystery. And I could even say action, and it's hard to imagine how a guy writing names in a notebook, having this detective trying to figure out if it's him doing it, doesn't sound too action-packed. But it is, because this detective is really smart, this guy with the notebook is really smart, so these two are constantly going back and forth, back and forth. It's like watching a real fight, but with their brains, and it's actually one of the most unique things I've ever read or watched. There is also a series of this. It's not on Netflix anymore, and do not watch the live-action movie of it because I've heard it's god-awful, and after reading a story summary, I can agree. But, so you can't really watch it. It is on Amazon Prime, but it's got like 50 episodes, so it's rather expensive to get it because it's £1 per episode. I think you can buy it for £30, but that's not really affordable, and the books are quite expensive too. I think they're £10 for a book like this, which has 2 of the books in there, and there are 12, so that'll be about £60 in total. So what I would recommend is seeing, if you're interested in this, I'd recommend looking for maybe, I don't know, a Kindle edition of it, or see if you can get it free online, if you can. I am justice. I protect the innocent and those who fear evil. I'm the one that will become the god of a new world. Another book recommendation is The Promised Neverland by Kao Shire and Pasuka Demizu. So this is another manga series, and it is about... Actually, I'm not even going to spoil this for you. All I can tell you is it's like Chicken Run. And what's good about this is that you don't need to get the books to read it, and you don't have to pay money to watch it because it is on Amazon Prime for free. I think it's a 12. So this is it looks like a kid's story, but I kid you not, it is anything but that. So it's a bit like Death Note. It's got a mystery action sort of feel to it. It's a thriller, and I really recommend this if you're sort of a teenager and don't care too much about children.
Run and survive, then destroy this damned world we live in.
But those are my recommendations. I hope that you've heard something that sounds a bit interesting. I feel like I've done a wide range, sort of differing in intensity, because Coraline is a children's book, Stephen King and Junji Ito are definitely not, and Death Note is sort of in the middle. You know, it's a teenage book. So I hope something's interested you. Maybe you'll take a look, and if you want to, please leave a comment in the comment section of books, spooky books that you have read or are going to read that you would recommend to me and the rest of my subscribers or viewers. Okay, thank you so much for watching, and have a good one, y'all. Bye.